There have already been a total of 6 different SpongeBob movies, counting the 2 spin-off movies at least. And with the most recent SpongeBob movie, which basically just came out, I decided I want to do a mini retrospective series in which I talk about all 6 of them. What ones I like, what ones I dislike, and not just the quality of them, but also the impact each of them had on the SpongeBob franchise itself, as an interesting discussion can be had about that when talking about each of them too. And let us begin by talking about what just may be not just the 2 most influential SpongeBob movies, but also the 2 best SpongeBob movies. Believe it or not, SpongeBob wasn't always this massive phenomenon and one of the biggest kids shows on TV. And there was a time when it might have not went on to become as big of a success as it did. There was a time when SpongeBob looked like this. And in the original version of SpongeBob, which was a book titled The Intertidal Zone, he wasn't even the main character. It was this interesting shrimp character. And when SpongeBob did eventually make its debut on TV, there were some people hating on it, and saying that it's so bad that it's proof Nickelodeon is running out of ideas and that the show is doomed. But it was indeed not doomed, as the show was a big hit and so successful that it got picked up for not just 1, but eventually 3 seasons and then a theatrical movie titled, well, the SpongeBob SquarePants movie, which then catapulted SpongeBob to an even higher level of success than ever before, and cemented it as Nickelodeon's biggest TV show, one that is still going on today. Being a show that debuted in 1999 and had all of its classic era seasons premiere on TV in the early 2000s, this movie was the very first time that SpongeBob took the leap to not just being in HD, but also widescreen, which may not seem that significant nowadays, but that was a pretty big change for the show. And this movie handled that big change perfectly. They didn't decide to completely change the visual style of SpongeBob to fit the medium of the big screen. They didn't make it suddenly CGI like later SpongeBob movies would. And being how this movie is from 2004, I'm happy that they didn't do that, because man, a 2004 CGI SpongeBob movie would look so dated. But no, this movie basically captured the same feel of the show, just giving it a more expensive and expressive look, showing that you really don't need to change much about SpongeBob as a show to make it function good as a movie. And another thing that shows that is the opening of the movie. All of the characters are very in line with how they act in the show. They haven't been changed at all. And we see in the beginning, through a very fun dream sequence, not only how SpongeBob still has that childlike, innocent love for his job that he has in the show, but we also see just how much it means to him the possibility that he might become manager of the Krusty Krab. And then we see that today is the day of the grand opening ceremony of the Krusty Krab 2, where he expects to be made the manager. But then, nope, because of how childish he is, Mr. Krabs gives it to Squidward instead of SpongeBob, and we see just how sad that makes him. And then we see at Goofy Goobers how, as his best friend, Patrick lifts SpongeBob up after he didn't get the promotion, and gets him to celebrate and have fun anyways, eating a ton of Goofy Goober sundaes. But he has a little too much fun, as SpongeBob gets completely drunk off of all of the ice cream. A funny concept, getting drunk off of ice cream, though believe it or not, something that can actually happen in real life, as you can actually get drunk off of eating too much. But for that to happen, you need to eat a lot. Anyways, despite still being pretty drunk at first, when he shows up at the Krusty Krab the next day, SpongeBob does show up at the exact perfect time, as King Neptune is about to kill Mr. Krabs, because Plankton framed Mr. Krabs for stealing Neptune's crown. And despite still being very mad at Mr. Krabs for not promoting him to manager, SpongeBob jumps in the way and stands up to Neptune, the king of the entire ocean, and says he won't let him kill Mr. Krabs. So King Neptune gives him 10 days, well, 6 days thanks to Patrick in a very funny scene, to travel all the way to the forbidden, scary Shell City and get his crown back. And Neptune freezes Mr. Krabs into basically a statue made of ice, Han Solo style. But all of this also isn't without Neptune additionally laughing at SpongeBob's confidence in himself and telling him that there's no way he'll actually be successful in his mission, for the very same reason Mr. Krabs didn't promote him to being manager. SpongeBob is just a kid, and none of the people around him believe he can actually amount to anything big or successful that he dreams of, or succeed at doing anything big he sets out to do, except for his good buddy Patrick, who he leaves Bikini Bottom with to get that crown. We also get a funny scene in which we see Patrick has a crush on Neptune's daughter, Mindy, and Tim having a thing for mermaids, believe it or not, is actually something that comes up again later in future episodes of SpongeBob. I guess everyone has a type. And Mindy, by the way, was voiced by Scarlett Johansson, who, despite being a celebrity and actress mostly known for playing a bunch of live-action characters, including one of the most iconic and well-known Marvel heroes, one of the original 6 Avengers in the MCU, the Black Widow, she doesn't give a lazy, stereotypical celebrity voice acting performance. She was very good as Mindy, and there was a very good chance you wouldn't even know she was the one voicing the character unless if, well, you already know before watching the movie. Anyways, Mindy tells SpongeBob and Patrick what to do once they get Neptune's crown, and gives them a magical bag of wind as a way for them to get back to Bikini Bottom. And then she sends them on their way. And then we get that iconic scene of SpongeBob and Patrick hopping into the paddy wagon, and Patrick saying, "Hey, I thought you didn't have a license." And then SpongeBob saying, "You don't need a license to drive a sandwich," which is pretty awesome, because not only is that a very funny, quotable line, but it also explains how we can have a movie where SpongeBob goes on this big adventure while not breaking the established, continuity of SpongeBob, being someone who doesn't have a license and is very bad at driving. Yet another way this movie proves that you don't need to change that much about SpongeBob as a show to make a good movie out of it. And speaking of iconic moments, we also get the scene of SpongeBob and Patrick pulling up at a gas station before fully setting out on the path to Shell City, and then the 2 guys at the gas station see them and what they're driving and just start laughing at them and laughing at the idea that those 2 kids are ever gonna make it alive to Shell City, which not only is a scene that establishes even more the stakes and dangers of what lies ahead for the 2 main characters of the movie, SpongeBob and Patrick, so that the audience knows that this isn't just another average everyday adventure for SpongeBob that we've seen him go on before in other episodes. Well, yeah, he might be somewhere outside of the usual Bikini Bottom, and he may even be surrounded by some advanced darkness or something like that. But there's not much of an actual threat that he's going to, you know, die. But no, in this movie, there is. But along with establishing even more that fact, this scene also gives us that extremely iconic and funny line of, "Are they laughing at us? No, Patrick, they're laughing next to us." And following that scene, there's the one where SpongeBob and Patrick have to go into this tough guy establishment that only actual men are allowed in, because because someone in the building stole the paddy wagon and the key for it. And SpongeBob and Patrick must attempt to fit in with all of these guys and not break character when a bubble they blow gets found by the tough guys, and the one in charge of the establishment lines everyone up and begins playing the Goofy Google theme song to see who breaks and who can't help but sing along to it. And despite being Goofy Goobles deep down, they must not. And then they successfully get out of there without getting found out. And after having gotten through that, they decide to stop for some ice cream and are tricked by this giant menacing fish with big teeth and everything. That isn't actually an old lady selling ice cream, but was actually just trying to trick them to get them close enough to eat them. And man, I love everything about this action sequence. The spooky, foggy atmosphere and the unsettling vibes you get before you find out what's actually going on, the creepy, unsettling nature of the fake old lady, and then the fake pet cat we also end up seeing, which is the definition of nightmare fuel. I love how cinematic this action sequence is, and how for a minute it keeps you on the edge of your seat as SpongeBob and Patrick come so close to getting eaten and only make it out of this giant fish's grasp last minute. And then after almost dying, and then finding themselves standing at the edge of a huge bottomless trench inhabited by a bunch of giant monsters, SpongeBob looks at Patrick and tells him maybe what everyone said about them was true, and they are not going to be able to make it to Shell City, so they might as well just give up and head home. But just then, just as they are about to do that, Mindy shows up and tells them that they can't do that. They can't give up. Because not only did he steal the Krabby Patty secret formula, but Plankton has taken over Bikini Bottom and turned all of SpongeBob and Patrick's friends into zombie slaves. So it's up to SpongeBob and Patrick to get the crown back and save the town and everyone they know from Plankton and his evil schemes. And Mindy also gives the two of them fake mustaches and convinces them that now, because of their mustaches, they have successfully become actual men, and now they can make it to Shell City. And with this newfound confidence, they continue on the path. And what follows is what might honestly be one of the most fun and classically SpongeBob Goofy scenes, where SpongeBob and Patrick are going around in the deep trench full of monsters while just happily singing about how they aren't afraid of anything now that they're actual men. And they sing about a bunch of the, when you think about it, pretty shallow and fake things that make them adult, manly men and not just kids. Like how the two of them now have facial hair and Patrick now changes his underwear. But they soon come face to face with Dennis, an evil assassin hired by Plankton to step on them. And he tells them straight up that their mustaches are fake and completely destroys this newfound image SpongeBob and Patrick had of themselves being actual men. And then Dennis gets interrupted when the giant Cyclops shows up. And I need to briefly talk about how creative the character design is for the Cyclops. Because nowadays I think they tend to look different, but this is just what scuba diving suits used to look like. And yeah, two ocean animals who don't know anything about, you know, us humans, someone wearing that type of scuba diving suit would indeed probably look like some giant Cyclops. And the Cyclops is shown snatching up SpongeBob and Patrick and kidnaps them, and he takes them to a gift shop where they are surrounded by a bunch of dead sea life that he's been using to make decorations out of. And after just having their confidence and false sense of security in being man enough to save the day pulled away from them by Dennis, and now placed on a table below a big heated lamp that is drying them up and slowly killing them, SpongeBob and Patrick are met with the crushing fact that it it seems like everyone was correct about them. They are just kids, incapable of making it to Shell City. And not only did they fail, but they let everyone down. But that's when they look off to the side and see a sign. And at that moment, they realize this gift shop is Shell City. And despite just being kids, they did make it. And as SpongeBob says, they did okay for a couple of goofballs. And with that, as they fully dry up, SpongeBob and Patrick let out a bit of a cry, which then sets off a chain reaction, setting them free. And after the Cyclops gets defeated, they are once again off with Neptune's crown and ready to head back to Bikini Bottom, as they find themselves on dry land at a live-action beach. And I always loved the atmosphere of this scene with the waves and everything. But when they are unable to use the magical bag of winds given to them by Mindy to get back home, that's when David Hasselhoff shows up, who is not a lifeguard, but he plays one on TV. And there have been many celebrity cameos in SpongeBob throughout the years, but this is, in my opinion, the best example of one, as it's not just some type of celebrity cameo that comes in and pauses the movie, like the celebrity cameos in the 10th anniversary special. No, he shows up and moves the plot along by helping SpongeBob and Patrick get back to Bikini Bottom just in time to save Mr. Krabs from being executed by King Neptune. And there's also something inherently funny about David Hasselhoff just showing up out of nowhere without any build-up throughout the movie and just saving the day, and how they have this big final show-off action sequence with SpongeBob, Patrick, and Dennis, which, by the way, looks very cinematic and is an amazing sequence. On top of David Hasselhoff, a scene for which, when making the movie, they made an entire life-sized model of David Hasselhoff. And there's also an element in the movie to him being some type of humanoid android or something. And you can't forget about the ending of the movie, how SpongeBob defeats Plankton with the power of an absolutely legendary SpongeBob song. You all know it. It's so good and iconic. And finally, he becomes manager, and the Ween song Ocean Man plays over the credits. And yeah, such an awesome movie. I absolutely love it. And so did so many people when it came out. And while some people have debates about whether or not season 4 can be technically considered a classic SpongeBob season, despite coming out after the movie, most people do consider this movie to have been the one last hurrah ending of classic SpongeBob. And even though I'm not one of those people that hates on every single SpongeBob season after the movie, I think every season has at least a few good episodes. I do believe this movie wasn't just when classic SpongeBob peaked, but when SpongeBob itself as a show and franchise peaked. One thing that stood out while watching it again for this video is that it's kinda poetic that one of the main themes that kept coming up throughout it is how SpongeBob is a kid, and that's okay. He doesn't have to change who he is to accomplish what he sets out to, just because a bunch of people don't think that he's enough of a man to succeed. And I find that kind of poetic because that's basically a message that you can take away from the success of this movie, as it fundamentally did not change what SpongeBob is as a show too much as a way of having it translate well into being a movie. In fact, it took everything that makes SpongeBob such an awesome show, its visual style, its comedy, its characters, and instead of changing that, it just placed them in a situation that heightens the stakes. Plankton is now the most evil and competent he's ever been, while still having the same goals of stealing the secret formula and taking over Bikini Bottom. It takes SpongeBob SpongeBob and Patrick on a mission that lets them play off of each other as goofy best friends who lift each other up. It challenges who they are as characters, and it teaches them, and us, the audience, a pretty good lesson. And now, over 2 decades and 5 movies later, this movie is still considered by many people to be the best SpongeBob movie. And if we aren't including the SpongeBob musical live on stage as a movie, because that musical is my favorite thing to ever come out of any franchise ever, I do think after watching it again, I have to agree, this is the best SpongeBob movie. And for a while, it was the only SpongeBob movie, as the second SpongeBob movie wouldn't come out until 2015, 11 years after the original SpongeBob movie came out. But when it eventually did, it also left a pretty big splash. Sponge Out of Water, a movie so unforgettable that it's still getting talked about 11 years later, and was not only a massive trip, but also did the impossible. Following the original SpongeBob movie in 2004, the show had officially became Nickelodeon's #1 cash cow franchise, even outliving Dan Snyder's massively successful live-action shows. Though given everything we now know about the making of those shows, maybe that's kind of a good thing. But despite all of this success, and the series not showing any major signs of ending anytime soon, and the massive success that was SpongeBob's debut in cinemas, they surprisingly didn't immediately begin making a sequel. Instead, it took over a decade for them to put out another one. And when asked about the possibility of a second SpongeBob movie, back in 2009, Paul Tibbett, who essentially had full control over the show after its creator, Steven Hillenburg, stepped down following the first movie and made Paul the one in charge. He described the idea of making another movie as a huge challenge, and that honestly makes a ton of sense as to why it took them so long to make a sequel. As I extensively talked about in my video about it, the original SpongeBob movie is considered by most people to be when the entire franchise peaked. Topping that, or even attempting to come close to topping that, seems completely impossible. And I think they felt the same way, because when watching 2015's The SpongeBob Movie Sponge Out of Water, you get the understanding that they did not go into it trying to copy and paste all of the good qualities that the first SpongeBob movie had, because you can't just do what that one did and top it. So instead, they set out to do something different. Something different for the franchise. And what they came up with led to the absolute strangest and trippiest SpongeBob movie. And one that also aimed at going big, which can be seen with how it opens up on Bikini Atoll, the island above Bikini Bottom, which we've seen countless times throughout the show, and even in the original movie. But in line with its go big or go home style, this movie gives us a look at the island that we've never seen before, as it suddenly zooms in on it, and we see that there's practically an entire jungle on the island. One that we see the villain of the movie, a live-action pirate known as Burgerbeard, traveling through and finding a magical book that anything you put in it comes true. And then we get the scene where the movie introduces us to SpongeBob and who he is, what his hobbies are and stuff, by just basically telling us. It does kind of feel like this movie just wanted to get all of the introductions and setup out of the way as quick as possible and just get to the good stuff. Unlike the previous previous movie, which had the dream sequence at the beginning and the scenes of SpongeBob getting ready to go to the Krusty Krab, annoying Squidward and saying hi to Patrick. And I kinda wish they did put a tiny bit more time into the beginning of this movie, and also didn't cut to that musical sequence where SpongeBob would have sung about how much he loves Mondays. Cause not only would that have been a very nice way to begin the movie, it's also just such an enjoyable song. But whatever, they didn't necessarily have to do much to introduce the audience to who SpongeBob is. This is the second SpongeBob movie after all, and this was 2015. By that point, who didn't already at least know of SpongeBob? The movie does instantly pick up though, as we get a massive action sequence that is one of the most all-out, large-scale Plankton schemes at getting the Krabby Patty secret formula. And the action in this scene is so awesome. 10 out of 10. It further establishes how big this movie is aiming to be, and also shows us how the animation in it is gonna be. It's kind of like the original movie, in which most of the movie is 2D animated, but just in high definition. But the character designs are basically representative of the ones in the post-movie era of SpongeBob. And the animation itself is like some type of in-between combination of the animation in the original movie, and also the more expressive animation we would eventually get in the post-sequel era of SpongeBob. Seasons 10, 11, 12, etc. And a lot of the people who are not a big fan of how over-the-top expressive a lot of the animation is in the newer episodes might also forget how stiff and unexpressive the animation was becoming over time throughout the post-movie seasons. But to then have this movie come along with a lot of insane action and very wacky expressive animation, that was just such a nice change of things. A little after this action scene, SpongeBob has to tug back and forth on the secret formula with Plankton, as he tells SpongeBob that if he gives him the formula and teams up to take it, they can both be wealthy and powerful, until he eventually betrays SpongeBob, foreshadowing Plankton's lack of an understanding of how a team is supposed to function, something that the movie will then build on. But at that moment, as he and Plankton are alone in Mr. Krabs' office, and SpongeBob is the only one who can stop Plankton from stealing the formula, it just completely vanishes, and neither of them know what happened to it. And this is another thing I love about this movie, how SpongeBob is characterized in it. In the post-movie seasons, which many people consider the dark age of SpongeBob, he was often characterized as being increasingly less and less of an actual character, with any sense of, well, anything going on around him. No IQ, not even a low IQ, just an unmovable object of living stupidity. But not in this movie. He's actually basically just like he was in the classic era, which we especially see in how, despite Mr. Krabs being his boss and often a bit of a father figure to him, SpongeBob doesn't just mindlessly stand by as Mr. Krabs falsely accuses Plankton of taking the formula. SpongeBob stands up for him and says, "No, Plankton is innocent." And then he blows a bubble to help him and Plankton escape from Mr. Krabs, who now feels like SpongeBob stabbed him in the back. And I just absolutely love how this entire scene plays out, and the tension between SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs. It's kind of funny how instantly, as soon as the Krabby Patty secret formula is gone, Bikini Bottom just erupts in flames and everyone becomes post-apocalyptic. And now we have SpongeBob and Plankton, who are basically outlaws and wanted criminals. And we see how SpongeBob tries to explain to Plankton what being teammates means and just the concept of it, which he does not understand whatsoever. And SpongeBob and Plankton's dynamic throughout the entire movie is one of the biggest strengths that it has, and how much the two characters clash in personality and outlook and view on life. And also, this specific scene in particular kind of reminds me of when SpongeBob in the classic season 1 episode was trying to explain to Plankton the concept of fun, which Plankton also was not understanding whatsoever. But I don't feel like the movie is copying that episode, just kind of building off of a character dynamic between SpongeBob and Plankton that has already been shown to work very well. We see SpongeBob and Plankton trying to then build a team by going to Patrick and trying to get Patrick to join it, but Patrick has completely lost his sense of loyalty to SpongeBob in these dark times and tries to sell SpongeBob out to Mr. Krabs and the angry mob. And then they go over to Sandy's tree dome, but then they find out that Sandy has completely gone insane. And I just want to say, I absolutely love the background design in this scene of the walls, well, technically windows, of Sandy's tree dome being covered by a psychotic scattered mess of sticky notes. And I also love the kind of spooky atmosphere at the beginning of the next sequence, in which SpongeBob and Plankton go to the Pineapple House and try to get Gary to join their team. And the Pineapple House is covered in nothing but snail slime, as we then see it's basically become a palace for Gary, who is now king of snails, as a bunch of other snails are gathered around in front of him and then chase SpongeBob and Plankton out. But by chase, I of course mean very slowly follow them from behind. A pretty funny gag that plays on snails being slow and sluggish. Eventually, we also have the scene of SpongeBob going to bed and then Plankton going inside SpongeBob's brain. And before what I'm about to say, I just want to make it very well known that I am someone who's never done any drugs. I never will do any drugs, and I do not condone any drugs. But with that said, I love how at this moment of Plankton experiencing what goes on inside the mind of SpongeBob, which is something that has happened before in the show and has already led to some pretty interesting visuals. But this scene is, I think, when this movie begins to do what it does best, and that is achieve peak levels of WTF strangeness, as this entire sequence feels like how I imagine tripping on acid would feel like if you also found yourself walking around in a Willy Wonka themed candy shop, you know, while on acid. And it is incredible. Eventually, SpongeBob and Plankton come up with the idea of making a time machine with the help of Karen, who has to use up all of the power in her system to make the time machine actually function. And then we get a surprisingly very emotional scene between Plankton and Karen. Plankton saying that he's glad she's on his team, and then just before he starts tearing up, he powers Karen down. That way she doesn't see him getting emotional. I love that little scene and little moments that shows that even though he acts like he doesn't, he does actually care about Karen. Something that the Plankton movie would eventually build off of, but we aren't there yet. And then once SpongeBob and Plankton power up the time machine, the movie gets even more strange and trippy. I love the animation and the music Squeeze Me that plays as they are traveling through space and time. Unlike the music in the original SpongeBob movie, this song does not feel like a very SpongeBob-esque song, but that's kind of perfect. It feels out of place, but it's also a bop, and combined with how fun of a song it is to listen to and how much it doesn't feel like a SpongeBob song, it just adds to this experience that we are on right now watching this movie. SpongeBob and Plankton travel to only a few days into the future, and in this future we see that everything in Bikini Bottom has been completely destroyed and covered in sand, even the Krusty Krab. And being how this is only a few days in the future, this scene and moment really brings home how high the stakes are. That if SpongeBob and Plankton do not succeed at using a time machine to then get the secret formula from before it disappeared, they really only have a couple days until everything completely gets destroyed. And it terrifies SpongeBob, as we see with how he quickly escapes back into the time machine. And then we get the most strange and bizarre scene in the entire movie. SpongeBob and Plankton end up in an outer space station that is shaped like a triangle, and they meet this giant magical talking dolphin known as Bubbles, who is the one who watches. His job is watching the entire universe and making sure the planets are at peace and everything, and he has to use the bathroom, and then he has SpongeBob and Plankton take over watching the universe, and then two of the planets completely collide and get destroyed. What? So, like, they literally destroy Saturn and Jupiter in this movie. Bubbles is very mad at them after this happens, and so they escape back into the time machine. And finally, they do end up seemingly getting the secret formula, and then they bring it back from the past to the present day in Bikini Bottom. But uh-oh, it's not the correct secret formula. It's a fake one that Plankton was gonna replace the actual one with. And after feeling like they failed this mission of theirs, SpongeBob decides that he will stand up and sacrifice himself for the future of Bikini Bottom, because Sandy comes in saying that they need a sacrifice for the sandwich gods, which is absolutely insane, and that's kind of the point. And just as he is about to die, him and Mr. Krabs smell Krabby Patties, and then after SpongeBob and his friends get to where the smell of Krabby Patties is coming from, we see the other way that this movie is animated, and that is the characters of SpongeBob and his friends are CGI now, and they are in a live-action beach setting, interacting with live-action characters and set pieces and everything like that, which is a very 2010s decision, and honestly would be a very 2020s decision too, because nowadays we can't just have a 2D animated movie. But I do like how it does kind of feel like just a logical progression of the story in this movie. It doesn't feel like it comes completely out of nowhere, and it's also kind of neat seeing this new way of SpongeBob being brought to the screens. We've never seen SpongeBob looking exactly like this before. And yeah, some of the animation in this sequence, it does look a little bit dated, even though it was only 10 years ago. That kind of happens. CGI kind of ages a lot faster than 2D animation, which honestly, in my opinion, doesn't usually age that bad. But for the time especially, and even now, the CGI in this movie is still pretty dang good, and probably looked the best that it could have at the time. And we finally get to see SpongeBob and friends come face to face with Boglebeard, who has been using the magical book he found to make it so that he is the one that has the secret Krabby Patty formula. He is basically shown to be like a live-action pirate version of Plankton, and I think as a character, he's a pretty good villain for a SpongeBob movie, even if I wish that they kept in the scene that showed his backstory a tiny bit and why he cared so much about becoming a famous fry cook. I think they should have kept that in, but it is what it is. Boglebeard tries to get rid of SpongeBob and his friends by sending them to Pelican Island, and this scene has some pretty good action as they are surrounded by bloodthirsty pelicans, and Patrick almost falls off of a cliff, and then SpongeBob puts into a piece of the magical book that Sandy found a super powered ending, in which they get teleported back to where Boglebeard is, and now they are full-on humanoid buff superheroes. And I like the designs of them as these superheroes. The way that the creators of this movie translated the characters of SpongeBob into being superheroes was done very well and creatively. I also find it funny how when they come back as these superheroes, some random guy that was at the beach looks at a Krabby Patty he was just eating and says, "Man, what is in these things?" Trust me, buddy, I've been wondering the same thing the entire movie. And all of the action that we then get between SpongeBob and his super-powered friends fighting Boglebeard is actually very good, and I think still holds up. Finally, Plankton, who is basically now like the Hulk, it's him and Boglebeard. Boglebeard offers him a partnership in which they would both become very wealthy and powerful, which echoes the same thing that Plankton previously told SpongeBob at the beginning of the movie. movie. And I like how, even though he does eventually go back to his old ways before the end of the movie, in this moment, on this mission, Plankton says no. He gets the formula back from Bogobield and gives it to Mr. Krabs. And then they go back to Bikini Bottom, and everything goes back to how it was. And then there's this epic rap battle of history between Bubbles the dolphin and some seagulls, which is the most 2010s thing ever, but it's also kind of fire. And so then the movie ends with the bop from Oreo, Squeeze Me, playing over some very nice and stylized credits. And then another song plays that is sung from the perspective of SpongeBob apologizing to Mr. Krabs for not wanting to date his daughter because Sandy Cheeks is the love of his life. Wait a minute. Huh? By the way, sorry, not trying to put down anyone's fan theories, but no, this does not mean Spandy is officially canon. This is just one song that was created by someone who hasn't even made a single SpongeBob episode. Anyways, as I mentioned in this video, the seasons following the original SpongeBob movie are what many fans of the franchise consider to be the dark ages of SpongeBob. And there are many reasons as to why this is, but one of the main things people often point to as possibly being one of the main reasons why the show had a bit of a decline in quality was how, after that movie came out, the creator of SpongeBob, Steven Hillenburg, well, this is a bit of a misconception. A lot of people think he fully stepped away from the production of it. He didn't ever fully walk away from SpongeBob. He did, though, at least mostly walk away from it. At least that's how it seems. But this movie marked basically his full-on comeback to the franchise, and he ended up being heavily involved in the making of Sponge Out of Water, along with Paul Tibbett, the guy who at the time was currently in charge of the show. And what the two of them, along with everyone else behind it, were able to achieve when making this movie should not be understated. They made what is the most experimental, creative, unique, and nautically nonsensical SpongeBob movie ever made. And although it, in my opinion, isn't quite as impactful as the lesson and theme in the previous movie, it also had a pretty nice lesson about coming together as a team for the kids watching the movie that, honestly, even a lot of adults probably need, as it seems like everyone always wants to fight with each other nowadays. You could go on Twitter and say, I like apples, and people would yell at you saying, actually, bananas are better than apples. And it's like, okay, I never said anything about bananas. This movie also put SpongeBob as a franchise on a path that led to a handful of seasons that many fans consider to be a bit of a comeback, in which it got good again. And even though I wouldn't say this one is actually as good as the original SpongeBob movie, Sponge Out of Water is definitely pretty up there and is a very satisfying follow-up to what is one of the best animated movies ever made. And that is an achievement that I think is pretty fantastic. And then there was another movie. Some movies are so good that they get increasingly more amazing every time you watch them, but this movie has the opposite effect. What began as a film that I thought was okay when I originally watched it back in 2020, after watching it at least 5 times, when I had to watch it again for this video, I kid you not, there were a couple moments where I felt like my soul was literally leaving my body. It felt like it was draining the life out of me. And you might think that sounds like something pretty overdramatic to say about a SpongeBob movie. And to be honest, this movie isn't 100% bad, just 99.999% bad. It does have some good qualities that I am going to be discussing. This isn't just going to be a video in which I talk about how this movie is the spawn of Satan. No. I'm saving that energy for another one I'll be talking about in this video. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This is 2020's, but also technically 2021's. It's complicated. The SpongeBob Movie, Sponge on the Run. It opens with narration by someone who is not the French narrator who we usually get in SpongeBob, even though that one is voiced by Tom Kenny, who also voices SpongeBob, aka, you know, the main character of the movie, so it's not like they couldn't get him for the film. But it's in this opening that we see what is the biggest positive this movie has going for it, and that is the animation. Unlike the animation in at least most of the previous two movies, which opted to have basically the same animation style of the show, but in high definition, this one went with something completely different for the franchise. This entire movie, minus the live action characters, is animated in a type of way that blends 3D animation and 2D animation in a way that is honestly beautiful. It is absolute eye candy, and I love how unique and stylistic it is. And we also get a fun little montage of SpongeBob hanging out with Gary as an upbeat Weasel song plays that is an absolute vibe. But don't let the good music and animation and the vibes trick you into thinking this is a good movie. Good movies are not just vibes. Good movies have substance, and substance is something that this opening does not have. This entire opening feels like useless scenes of nothing yet happening that could have been at least cut in half and are only here to fill time. To explain what I'm talking about, in the opening 12 minutes of the original SpongeBob movie, we get so much. The fun sequence of the live action pirates singing the SpongeBob theme song, the iconic dream sequence that is not only very funny and goofy, but also establishes that SpongeBob literally dreams of becoming the manager of the Krusty Krab. We get SpongeBob annoying Squidward, SpongeBob and Patrick discussing their plans of celebrating at the Goofy Goober ice cream establishment after SpongeBob is made manager. We get Plankton dusting off Plan Z. We get the Krusty Krab 2 grand opening ceremony and Mr. Krabs choosing to make Squidward manager instead of SpongeBob, making SpongeBob very sad. Jeez, all of that in only 12 minutes. What do we get in the opening 12 minutes of this movie? Like I said, that one montage, there's an unfunny, kind of annoying gag involving SpongeBob and Patrick yelling back and forth at each other. Good morning, SpongeBob. Good morning, Patrick. Good morning, SpongeBob. Good morning, Patrick. SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs opening the Krusty Krab for the day. Sandy introducing us to Otto, a droid that is basically not even a character, just a plot device the movie will eventually use as a way of getting SpongeBob from point A to point B without him having a license. We see Otto try to fire Mr. Krabs from the Krusty Krab, and then Mr. Krabs kicking him out of the building, and then Karen taking Otto into the chum bucket because she thinks he's cute. And oh yeah, she also tells Plankton that it's not Mr. Krabs who keeps stopping him from successfully taking the formula, it's SpongeBob. And then that's basically it. Wow, you established all of that in only 12 minutes? Are you sure you didn't need 30 or 50 minutes to do that? I swear, the pacing in this movie is as slow as Gary the Snail. And I just mentioned how the beginning of the movie is narrated by someone who is definitely not the usual French narrator, but then the guy that they have introduce us to the villain of the movie, King Poseidon, after 15 minutes by the way, is the French narrator, which means that this movie has not one, but two completely different narrators. Why? I guess the guy who voices the one at the beginning is also Tim Hill, the guy who directed the movie, which is kinda cool, but to me, it just doesn't make sense to have two completely different narrators in the same film, especially when one only shows up 15 minutes after the other one. How can a movie be so slow when it comes to pacing, but yet so fast when it comes to hitting us with inconsistencies? And that's another thing. The character of King Poseidon basically is just King Neptune in the original movie, but less entertaining. And instead of him being obsessed with the balding top of his head, it's his aging skin on his face. Wow, how original. King Poseidon says the skin on his face is as ageless as a baby's butt, which is just such an unfortunate choice of dialogue for a character in a movie made by the same company that employed John Kay and Dan Snyder. And I'm absolutely not trying to make a big deal out of it or say that there was anything insidious intended behind that one sentence in this movie, but I just always hated it. It's very unfortunate in my opinion. He ends up kidnapping Gary because snail slime makes his face look young. And when SpongeBob comes home to find out Gary is missing, we get the first of many Camp Coral flashbacks in this movie that are, yes, very cute and wholesome, but I'll feel implemented into the story of the movie in a very unnatural way that also completely pauses and messes up the pacing of it, just so that we can see SpongeBob and eventually SpongeBob's friends as kids many years before the story of this movie. It just comes so out of nowhere, doesn't help the plot in any way. Also in this scene, we get the setup that makes no sense of Atlantic City being some dangerous, deadly, lost city that SpongeBob reads about in a book and is now gonna have to travel to save Gary. But yet when he actually does get there later in the movie, we see that it is a very packed city with a ton of people in it. Bikini Bottom News is even doing a segment there, and it's basically shown to be the Las Vegas of the ocean, which, as far as I know, is not a lost city. And now we are already a half hour into this movie, and it feels like nothing is happening. SpongeBob and Patrick do set out to go on a road trip, kind of like the original SpongeBob movie. But before anything actually fun, interesting, entertaining, etc. can happen, we have what is, in my opinion, one of the most annoyingly unfunny jokes in the entire movie. It was so unfunny, it made me want to go back and watch the Emoji Movie of all things. How many of you guys even remember that movie? And what makes it especially so moan-inducing is that in the teaser trailer for Sponge on the Run, it was actually a pretty funny gag. Patrick says the adventure he and SpongeBob are about to go on is gonna be like a buddy movie. SpongeBob says, "I love your sense of irony, Patrick," and then we see Patrick ironing an outfit. A quick, funny chuckle. But in the movie, they drag the joke out, having Patrick get all meta, saying how halfway through their adventure, they're gonna argue over something dumb and then make up, and then that's exactly what happens. They begin arguing about what type of movie their adventure is gonna be like, and it is so unfunny and stupid, and throughout the joke, I begin asking, this is still going on? It's also such an out-of-character moment for SpongeBob and Patrick, just for the sake of being meta, as if meta instantly equals funny. No, you gotta actually try to make a meta joke funny. Anyways though, I could probably make an entire video essay about this one joke. They, shockingly, instantly apologize to each other for fighting and calling each other names, and then, finally, they are once again back on the mission, setting out on a road trip adventure we still have yet to see. As an awesome and iconic Willie Nelson song plays and the movie tries to convince you that you are having a fun time. Are you having a fun time? Are you having a fun time yet? The movie introduces us to a magical tumbleweed known as Sage, played by Keanu Reeves, who is, yes, one of many live-action celebrities in this SpongeBob movie, which kinda, in my opinion, makes it feel like the movie version of the 10th anniversary special that was literally just a bunch of unnecessary celebrity cameos included just to get eyes on the special and not to tell an actual good story. But Keanu is okay in this movie, at least when it comes to his acting, and there are a couple funny lines between him and SpongeBob and Patrick. But when it comes to how his character fits into the narrative of this movie, well, he doesn't. He is introduced in what is seemingly explained to us as being a dream sequence in which SpongeBob and Patrick have to fight live-action zombie pirates and meet Snoop Dogg because why not, I guess? I say that, but aside from the animation and Weasel, Snoop is probably the best addition to this movie. But then, when SpongeBob and Patrick seemingly wake up, this character, Sage, who they met while dreaming, is now traveling with them. So, was it a dream? Was it not a dream? I swear, nothing in this movie makes sense. And not in the fun, trippy way of Sponge out of Waddle. I just don't think they thought about much of anything while making this movie, aside from how much money they could make with it. Snoop, please don't leave so soon. This movie needs you. There's literally nothing fun about it once your song is over. I do like how Mr. Krabs is shown to miss SpongeBob while he's not in Bikini Bottom, instead of just being the one-dimensional I like money character. And when SpongeBob and Patrick finally make it to Atlantic City, I do like the colors of the bright lights in the city. I'm complimenting bright lights. I am grasping at straws to have something positive to say about this movie. The sequence of SpongeBob and Patrick acting dumb and silly and gambling and stuff while the Vida Loca song plays is also pretty fun, I guess. Even if it's yet another instance of this movie just being carried by the music. SpongeBob and Patrick eventually get thrown in jail and then are about to get executed for trying to steal a snail from King Poseidon until SpongeBob's other friends show up and argue that SpongeBob is innocent and doesn't deserve to die because he's a nice guy and they all went to summer camp with him when they were kids. Yeah, these Camp Coral flashbacks that basically show up at the climax of this movie, they are, like I said earlier in this video, very cute and wholesome, but they also feel like they come completely out of nowhere, and they absolutely destroy what a little pacing this movie even had. And it honestly feels like the only actual reason they are even in the film is because Nickelodeon wanted to get people hyped about the, at the time, upcoming spinoff known as Camp Coral, also known as SpongeBob Muppet Babies. There was a message after all of the flashbacks and an action scene where SpongeBob tells King Poseidon he doesn't have to try to look young all the time and he can just be himself. And how it comes up at the very last minute makes it kinda just feel like a cop-out and very anticlimactic, but it's not hypothetically a bad message to try to teach in a SpongeBob movie. I mean, you could kinda say the original movie kinda did that too, and the montage at the end with all of the snails living happily in Bikini Bottom is very cute, especially since I love animals. And I think the pro-wildlife message is amazing, even if it is kinda tacked on. And I do actually love the song at the end about SpongeBob being the secret to the formula, sung by the other characters, along with the music that plays during the credits, especially the Kelpie G. And everyone knows Take On Me is a bop. Again though, I am not Anthony Fantano, and this is not a video about the music and soundtrack album. This movie feels very cynical. Like the thinking behind it was just, instead of trying to make something actually impactful and creative, like the previous two SpongeBob films, let's just throw a bunch of meaningless crap at the wall. Not think about any of it. Include a bunch of celebrity guest cameos, a bunch of licensed music, and scenes that break up the pacing just to promote a brand new spin-off show that no one will even like. I wanted to come away from this movie with a balanced take, like, come on guys, it's not that bad. Cause new SpongeBob stuff often gets a lot of hate nowadays, which has basically become a bit of a grift. And I don't want to be like that. But after watching it again, no. If anything, I think a lot of you guys guys might have under-exaggerated how bad it is. Because this is not only a bad SpongeBob movie, this is the worst SpongeBob movie ever made. At least, that is when it comes to movies that have SpongeBob in the title. But when it comes to the worst one in the SpongeBob franchise, the spin-off Sandy Cheeks movie actually somehow beats it with how bad it is. And unfortunately, that's the next movie I'm gonna have to talk about. When the SpongeBob Movie 3 came out, it seemed like everything went as bad as possible. One of the only good qualities that it had, in many people's opinion, including my own, was its beautiful animation style. An animation style that would probably be best experienced on the big screen. Unfortunately though, the movie was supposed to come out in 2020, and you guys know what else happened in 2020. So, given everything that year, the movie's debut in cinemas was cancelled almost everywhere, as it only got to be shown on the big screen at a few select movie theaters, not in America. It did also still come out in 2020, but on Netflix, and only in Canada, the UK, and a few other places. And it did not get to come out in America until 2021 on Paramount Plus. And while the movie does have its fans, when everyone eventually got to see it, well, the majority of SpongeBob fans did not like it, and found it to be so bad that it effectively killed off the comeback that the franchise had been having ever since the previous movie. You know, seasons 9B, 10, and 11. Now we live in an era where many of the new episodes of the show are once again being heavily criticized, to the point where it feels like I've time traveled back to when season 7 was brand new. It is now cool again to hate modern SpongeBob. However, this isn't the only impact the movie had on the franchise. It also kicked off a new era of SpongeBob, the spin-off era, as we have since gotten 2 spin-off shows, including Camp Coral, which basically everyone hated. And eventually, in 2024, Netflix came out with a SpongeBob spin-off movie. One that, in my opinion, is absolutely awful. This is Saving Bikini Bottom, the Sandy Cheeks movie. The film, if you can even call it a film, opens with Sandy Cheeks going around Bikini Bottom collecting scientific data about this underwater civilization while singing a song. And I did talk briefly in my video discussing the SpongeBob movie Sponge Out of Water about the deleted song Thank Gosh It's Monday that they were gonna have at the beginning of the movie that I wish that they kept, because it was a very fun song and a much better and more enjoyable and entertaining way of introducing the setting and the characters than just having Burger Beard basically tell the audience everything that they need to know through reading a book. And in fact, music in SpongeBob movies tend to actually be pretty good, even when they don't feel like they belong in a SpongeBob movie. Like when Snoop Dogg appeared in Sponge on the Run and just started rapping about zombie pirates. It felt very out of place, did not feel like a SpongeBob song, but it still slapped. But this song at the beginning of this movie is so, it feels very juvenile, like something about it just feels very babyish. As if I am not technically being talked down to, because it's a song, but sung down to. As if the movie is saying to me, hey stupid, we made you this song to tell you in the most most low IQ way possible who the main character is and what she is all about. That way you can follow along in the movie. This is Sandy Cheeks. She is a squirrel. She is like a fish out of water because she is a squirrel that lives underwater. She is a scientist, and so because she is a scientist, she is going around collecting scientific data. You get that, stupid? Do we need to dumb it down a little bit for you? And the song itself, it isn't even very fun to listen to. Like, okay, it's not painful to listen to, but the combination of just how preschool and babyish the writing feels, and how mid and lackluster the song sounds, makes me almost embarrassed to be watching a movie where this is the first minute of it. And it is not at all helped by the visuals and animation in the movie, which I don't want to talk about. But this is quite possibly the worst SpongeBob has ever looked as a franchise. This movie, yes, in some scenes and moments, does look okay-ish, but somehow, so many scenes and moments in this movie look even worse and even more low budget than the worst looking episodes of Camp Coral, the spin-off series that a lot of people hated and clowned on for how bad it looked visually. This movie is visually of a lesser quality than the Activision SpongeBob games, which were Xbox 360 games that somehow looked worse than a PlayStation 2 game. And especially in the sequence of this opening song, Mr. Krabs and all the other characters, when they are looking directly at the camera while dancing, they look so lifeless and soulless. It gives off a similar vibe to demons living inside the TV screen, walking up to the fourth wall, about to break free and grab me and suck me in. It is that bad looking. And in this moment, SpongeBob and Patrick look like they want to kill Sandy Cheeks. They are not supposed to look like that, but they do. Anyway, Bikini Bottom is snatched up and taken away by a bunch of scientists. And then we get what is possibly the most awful line spoken by SpongeBob. All of my streaming videos on demand. I can't demand them anymore. And speaking of SpongeBob, throughout this movie, he's like if you give a 2-year-old an energy drink. He isn't stupid in the usual funny way he is in the series. He is so hypo and annoying, and to literally spend so much time throughout it just making stupid noises, not speaking in actual language and saying things that could have the potential of being funny lines of dialogue. Throughout most of the movie, he's literally just making noises for the sake of making noises and being loud. Watching this film had me wanting to grab him and yell, "Shut up!" SpongeBob and Sandy travel to Texas because that's where Bikini Bottom is being held. Then there's a hideous looking visual gag with SpongeBob. And then another. And then another. A couple small positives about this movie. It's kind of a neat addition to Sandy's character that they made it so she canonically is able to fly, because she is a flying squirrel. And I kinda like the idea that SpongeBob is able to stay hydrated thanks to all the cactuses in Texas, because cactuses have water in them. But it would still make more sense if they just had him wear a water helmet throughout the movie. In fact, I kinda wonder if they just forgot to give him a water helmet in this movie, and the "oh yeah, cactuses have water" thing was just a last minute addition to explain him not needing one. Not saying that's what happened, but I wouldn't be shocked. I do like the scene of Mr. Krabs leaving the Krusty Krab once Bikini Bottom is now in a fishbowl, and him getting frightened by the spooky atmosphere. That scene was kinda decent. But then we get to see how painfully cringe all of the live action segments are in this movie, as everything every live action character does and says makes me feel like I'm gonna die of cringe. And that's nothing against the actors who play the characters. In other movies, they are probably very talented people, but in this film, all of the jokes, all of the scenes, all of the sections of the movie with the live action characters are written and directed so badly. The live action scenes also all feel feel very cheap and low budget, and not in the creative way that a lot of the Patchy segments feel intentionally low budget, as a parody of low budget live action crap. These scenes don't even feel like a parody of that. They feel like what the Patchy segments are parodying. Look at how this CGI sea monster interacts with the villain of the movie in a way that looks so obviously fake and green screened, and then compare that to the CGI in Sponge Out of Water. And that movie was from 2015, over half a decade ago by the time this one came out. Anyway, after that abysmal introduction scene that tells us how much of a step down the main villain of this movie is from all 3 of the previous films in the SpongeBob franchise, we get a scene, and I kid you not, of SpongeBob sniffing a live-action pile of poop and saying it smells amazing. Fantastic. If there is one moment in this entire film that sums it up in just a few seconds, it's easily this one. And then we get an action scene of Sandy fighting against a bunch of snakes, and then one snake crawls inside SpongeBob's body, and we get this image of the snake poking its head out of SpongeBob's mouth as SpongeBob is unable to shut it. And I'm not the type of person who is easily made nauseous when watching a movie, but this visual did make me kind of uncomfortable, and, well, I don't think I'd be able to eat something while watching this. What the dolphin noise. Oh, and then Sandy inflation fetish material. Thanks, I hate it so much. I hate it so much. Then Sandy's family show up and save SpongeBob and Sandy from the snakes. And speaking of Sandy's family, this movie is the debut of them. And honestly, they are okay in this movie. I like them a lot better in the Christmas special. I kind of feel like in this movie, they don't leave much of an impact, but not leaving much of an impact is a lot better than leaving a massive negative impact, which is basically what almost everything else in this movie does. Eventually, we get a scene of SpongeBob going around and tickling a bunch of people's feet at a live-action swimming pool. What the actual kelp is going on? Did Dan Snyder make this scene? I can't even tell you guys how much I hate feet stuff. This is yet another moment where it feels like the Sandy movie was made by people who were thinking, how can he make this as uncomfortable and painful to watch as possible? Not that it was, though. I'm hating on this movie, but that does not mean I'm hating on any of the people who made it. I'm sure they are all very talented people who can make awesome stuff. I just wish he didn't decide to make this. SpongeBob and Sandy get chased by a live-action dog, as if that didn't already happen in the 20th anniversary special. And by the way, I wish I was watching that special instead of this. SpongeBob and Sandy make it to the science lab where Bikini Bottom is being held, and they come face to face with the villain of the movie. And the villain, by the way, is named Tsunami. And I am not one to talk when it comes to naming characters, but can I at least make a joke that compares the name Tsunami to the villain in Space Jam 2 being named Algae Rhythm? Anyway, she puts Sandy in a cage and is now gonna clone SpongeBob so she can sell a bunch of pet SpongeBobs. And then the low budget, visual style of the movie hits their lowest point and completely fall off of a cliff, as we get a backstory flashback sequence of Tsunami as a kid, but they just Photoshop the adult version of the character's face on top of the kid actor. And yeah, I know it's supposed to be funny looking, but it's not funny. It's just awful looking. And then we see that Tsunami is actually an android body with a human head or whatever. And the visuals do not get any better, making it so impossible to take the big villain of this, you know, actual movie serious in the slightest. Unlike the villains in the previous SpongeBob movies. This villain character they've made just feels like a walking joke, but one with an unintentional punchline. The punchline being how bad of a character she is. But I'm not laughing. Sandy is feeling defeated, but then a SpongeBob clone says, "Don't give up on saving Bikini Bottom." Oh boy, he said the thing. The villain gets defeated and becomes one with the CGI fish monster from earlier in the movie, and yup, that's an hour and 22 minutes of my life I'll never get back. Does it even need to be said? This movie is so unwatchable. I tried making a YouTube series a few years ago called Fixing Animation, in which I would go over pieces of animated media that many people hate and give ways that I would go about fixing it. But this is one of those movies that I honestly can't see how you could fix. You would have to make the entire movie over again from scratch. Literally, almost every single decision they made when making it is so head-scratchingly the complete opposite of what they should have done to make it not even good, not even mid, just even slightly not painful to watch. Because that's what this movie is. The most painful viewing experience to have ever come out of the SpongeBob franchise. This beats any bad episode of SpongeBob. This beats that crappy spin-off show, Camp Coral. And it's a shame too, because Sandy Cheeks is not a bad character. You could make a very good and fun movie with Sandy as the main character. But instead, they made a movie somehow 10 times worse than the previous one, as the quality continued getting lower and lower with each movie to come out of this franchise. But then, something unexpected happened. SpongeBob movies had a comeback? Following the strange new trend of everything going as bad as possible surrounding each new movie in the franchise, the Sandy Cheeks movie somehow got leaked in its entirety before it even came out. Meaning, by the time it eventually dropped on Netflix like it was originally intended to, almost everyone had already made up their minds about it. And the overwhelming sentiment about it was exactly what I said in my review of the movie. It is so bad. But then, believe it or not, as if one entire movie leaking before its release date wasn't already strange enough, another movie in the SpongeBob franchise also got leaked before coming out. Man, they need better security at Netflix. But something was different about this one. When this one leaked online and then officially debuted on Netflix in 2025, many SpongeBob fans watched it and said that movie was actually awesome. And after watching it multiple times for this video, I gotta say, awesome might be an understatement. This is Plankton the movie. This movie opens up with narration actually by Frenchie, unlike Sponge on the Run, which for some reason had a completely different narrator. And then we get a pretty fun song about how this is yet another SpongeBob movie, which is then hilariously interrupted by Plankton breaking the fourth wall and saying, "No, this is my movie." And we get a cameo from Spot, who is one of the best characters introduced after the original movie, in my opinion. And we get to see Karen is hanging out with the gal pals. And I like how this movie isn't afraid to include newer additions to the series. Plankton is on yet another mission to steal the Krabby Patty secret formula, and unsurprisingly, it doesn't go very well for him. But when he gets back to the chum bucket, he is shocked when he sees there are a ton of customers there, because Karen, actually behind his back, made changes to the restaurant that made it suddenly super successful. But Plankton is unhappy and ungrateful, as this newfound success came without any evil, without stealing anything, without stealing the secret formula. And him and Karen have huge, gigantic fights, ending with Karen going insane and transforming into this big Hydra version of herself, as Karen kicks Plankton out of the chum bucket and transforms it into this magnetic version of itself that makes everything made of metal and every building in Bikini Bottom come to it, making the chum bucket become a bigger and bigger monstrosity and doomsday machine that Karen is gonna use to take over the planet. And while this is happening, we get a very fun and awesome villain song with Karen, and also a scene that is animated in a very good looking 2D style. And let me talk about the animation in this movie. The 3D animated sequences are still not necessarily movie theater film quality, but they are a lot better than the animation in the Sandy Sheiks movie. That movie looked horrible. This one, at its worst, looks kind of like Xbox 360 video games cutscenes. But at its best, this movie looks incredible, especially when we get multiple scenes in it, which are animated in different animation styles. Like this one is a 2D animated sequence that feels like a mix of 90s action show animation, but also kind of an anime influence. I don't fully know, I don't watch anime, but either way, this scene looks amazing. We also get a quick cameo from the Goofy Goober's ice cream establishment that originally debuted in the SpongeBob movie in 2004. Plankton finds himself having to team up with SpongeBob, and throughout this movie, we get some pretty good and funny back and forth between SpongeBob and Plankton. SpongeBob is actually not annoying in this movie, unlike the Sandy movie. And like we've seen before in other episodes and the second movie, SpongeBob and Plankton are just characters that bounce off of each other very well. I must say the pacing kind of suffers a tiny bit when this movie, you can tell what they want to do is show us a bunch of flashbacks of Plankton when he was younger, and it's not a huge deal, but the way that they get to showing us those flashbacks, it feels a little bit forced. We got SpongeBob acting like a psychiatrist just kind of out of nowhere in a scene that kind of feels like, for just a quick minute, the movie is kind of coming to a stop just so we can have SpongeBob acting like a psychiatrist. But in the flashbacks, we see some other pretty cool animated sequences, like one that is in black and white, in which we see Plankton inventing the original model of Karen out of just a potato and a calculator. There's a super fun sequence of Mr. Krabs trying to fight against this big monstrosity and Hydra Karen. One of my favorite jokes in the movie is when Plankton and SpongeBob get to Bikini State University, and SpongeBob gets offended when Plankton says, "Good old BSU." That line might go over a lot of kids' heads, but if you are an adult and you get it, yeah, it's pretty funny. I also kinda laughed when, only a minute after that joke, Plankton tells SpongeBob, "Quick man, put me under." I like how after 2.5 decades of it being said in the show that Plankton went to college, in this movie, we actually get to see Plankton going to college, and it not going so well in many ways, as he was so small compared to all of his other classmates and just got kicked around. But we are shown that he still, despite this, had one friend, Karen. And okay, this is something about this movie I know some people may dislike. It does contradict the iconic SpongeBob special, Friend or Foe, in which we see that Plankton and Mr. Krabs used to be best friends. But if you view this as a completely fresh and new take on what could be Plankton's backstory, I actually like how they made the creative decision to replace Mr. Krabs in the flashbacks with Karen being the only actual friend Plankton could count on being by his side, as it helps it make their relationship feel even more meaningful to both of them as characters, especially during this movie when they split up. And it's neat watching Plankton continuing to upgrade Karen from just an AI calculator powered by a potato to the humanoid computer she is today. Something that is definitely one of this movie's biggest strengths, even if the way we get there leads to some very pacing, like I said. With all of the flashbacks it has, this movie is like the definition of showing instead of telling. This movie does go out of its way to not be too lazy to let us actually experience the story it's giving us. And that's how every movie should be. It's pretty funny in a dark way how when SpongeBob and Plankton go back to his old college home, the movie throws that idea at us that after all these decades, Plankton's old roommate has just been frozen inside his closet. What the heck? SpongeBob and Plankton go back to where Plankton has a bunch of his old evil inventions. There's a funny callback to the handsome Squidward meme where it's handsome Plankton. And then Plankton does something that shows where he is at in this point into the movie as a character. Instead of doing as SpongeBob is suggesting, finding a way back into Karen's house, Plankton tries to invent another Karen to take down the original Hydra Karen. But then this entire plan backfires as the two Karens now combine into an even bigger and more powerful Karen. And after this, SpongeBob completely blows up on Plankton, telling him this is all his fault. And SpongeBob, after being lied to, leaves Plankton behind. And then we get a song with Plankton, and musical notes with Plankton are always at least pretty good. This song isn't one of the best ones in this movie in my opinion, but it's still pretty fun. And after it, Plankton is about to meet his demise. But then, despite still being mad at him, SpongeBob saves Plankton with the gal pals. It gets revealed the reason Karen went so insane wasn't just because of being mad at Plankton, but when she was angry, she removed her empathy chip, making it so she is fully evil and can no longer feel empathy to anyone. And then, when it gets shoved into Plankton, we get what is, in my opinion, the best looking, best animated, most impactful 2D sequence in the movie, of Plankton finally feeling bad about the way he treated Karen, and as he comes to terms with the fact that because of his self-centered actions, he is actively losing the woman he loves, as he then finds himself chasing after an image of Karen in his head that is slipping away from him as he's sprinting throughout a dark, nightmarish, atmospheric cave, which is seemingly also made out of chum. And there's pretty intense sounding action music playing in the background as he's yelling out to Karen, "Please come back to me." They were cooking when they made this scene. And they also cooked when making a pretty lit action scene between the gal pals and the Hydra Karens, as Plankton finally then finds his way back to Karen and apologizes for how underappreciative he's been to Karen, and he says he loves her. But while this is happening, you can't help but wonder if Plankton would even be saying all of this if it wasn't for the empathy chip in his brain, and if that was the only reason why he suddenly decided to apologize to Karen. I mean, I guess it would still make sense as a logical conclusion to the story, but it would feel like kind of an underwhelming conclusion on an emotional level, as in that case, Plankton wouldn't have even had much of a character arc. He wouldn't have changed because he wanted to. He would have changed because of some chip. And also, if it was this chip that was the solution to the conflict in this movie, I would have been pretty opposed to that, to be honest, as I feel like it could have sent the wrong message that these pieces of mad science-y dystopian types of futuristic technology that people might one day be able to fuse with their bodies is the answer and solution. And I am absolutely dreading the day where the most greedy and scummy tech billionaires are trying to capitalize off of this type of technology by mass marketing it as the next iPhone. But also, you could say the idea of marrying a computer in it of itself is pretty dystopian, but still, I just don't think it's a good idea to have some type of brain chip be what saves the day in a movie in this day and age. But that's the thing, when Plankton apologizes to Karen, she dismisses it, as she feels like it means nothing, because he's only saying that because of the empathy chip. But then, at that moment, Plankton takes it out, and it's been completely fried this entire time, meaning everything he's saying to Karen is genuinely coming from him. And after being tempted again by the secret formula, the object he's been trying to take for the past 25 years, just sitting there in front of him, he tosses it aside. He chooses to save his marriage with Karen Karen over everything else. Karen accepts his apology, and then the two of them set out to take over the planet. And yeah, because of SpongeBob and Patrick, Plankton and Karen do end up failing once again, but this time they fail together. In many ways, Plankton the movie has everything I could have wanted and expected from a movie that centers around Plankton. Plankton is one of the best characters in SpongeBob, and even in most bad episodes of the show, he's one of the few positive highlights in them. Not only is he one of the most iconic animated villains, but the character also is just very entertaining to watch. And the same thing could be said about him in this movie. And also, like I've said, putting SpongeBob and Plankton in the position where they have to team up with each other, like in this movie, is something that has already been shown to be an idea you can get a very enjoyable story out of in the second SpongeBob movie. So it makes sense that they did the same thing in this one. And speaking of which, I am so happy to say that the way SpongeBob is characterized in it is 1,000 times better than how he was characterized in Saving Bikini Bottom. He's actually not annoying in this. I can't believe it. The animation is also another huge improvement from Saving Bikini Bottom, and in the 2D animated sequences, the animation gets pretty dang awesome. And while the other spin-off movie was basically just gross, hideous visuals and facial expressions back to back, this one wasn't like that. And I love how this movie handles the relationship between Plankton and Karen in a way that feels like a very genuine and honest deconstruction and study and take on what could have otherwise felt like a cheap, thoughtless, and tacked on husband and wife breakup storyline. I just wish I had better pacing. But even though the pacing feels a bit off in a couple sections of the movie, everything else about it was amazing. And especially after watching it multiple times for this video, I do actually love it. No hate to Sponge Out of Water. As I've said, I loved that one too. But this one managed to do something no SpongeBob movie since the original one was able to do. Not just be a very fun and enjoyable movie in the SpongeBob franchise, but one that has actually impactful and genuinely felt emotional elements at the center of it. Plankton the movie is a beautiful masterpiece. And I'm honestly just so happy to see things beginning to pick up again for SpongeBob movies. But will the final SpongeBob movie we will be taking a look at in this mini-series keep this positive trend going? The answer is yes. It is the best SpongeBob sequel. Following a movie in 2020 which didn't actually get to come out in theaters worldwide due to global events that year, and then the two spin-off movies on Netflix, the one most people hated and then the other one people loved, in late 2025, Nickelodeon came out with the first full-on theatrical SpongeBob movie since 2015, the SpongeBob movie Search for SquarePants. It opens up on a very cool-looking live-action scene that gives us a little glimpse at the Flying Dutchman's origin story, showing that he wasn't always the animated ghost and iconic villain we know him as in the show. He used to be a live-action pirate, but not a TV host like Patchy. He was an actual pirate, like Boglebeard in the second movie. But then, due to an evil magic spell he stumbled upon, he got transformed into the Flying Dutchman, which is what he will forever be, unless if he can find an innocent soul, one that would break the hex. An innocent soul like SpongeBob, whom we see waking up, and after measuring his height, he finds he has grown a total half a clam taller, meaning he is now officially a big guy. And this will be one of the main themes of the film. Like how in the original SpongeBob movie, movie, he wants to be seen as a man instead of just a kid. In this one, he wants to be seen as a brave and tough big guy, which yeah, is a bit similar, but I don't think it's too similar. It doesn't feel like this movie is ever copying that one. We see SpongeBob eating some Kelpo cereal in stores now, and confidently getting ready for the day while listening to the Ice Spice song, Big Guy. And yeah, the song has pretty dumb lyrics, but also it's a bop. And while, yes, Ice Spice lyrics do just be like that, I say that as someone who thinks Y2K is a very fun album. Ice Spice stans, please do not come at me. I do think, even if it might just be a happy accident, the shallowness of the song is kind of a perfect reflection of SpongeBob's very shallow and artificial idea that just because he is a bit tallow, now he is suddenly a completely different person. Yeah, he's a big guy now in a literal sense, but when it comes to who he is deep down, we see in a scene that kind of reminds me of the actually pretty good season 5 episode, Roller Cowards. SpongeBob and Patrick are about to go on a big, massive roller coaster, and despite his increased height, SpongeBob still gets too scared to go on it. And I like how when SpongeBob goes to the Krusty Krab to try to get Mr. Krabs to cover for him so he doesn't have to go on the coaster with Patrick, Mr. Krabs does actually cover for SpongeBob so he doesn't have to do it, showing that Mr. Krabs does actually care about SpongeBob. This is good setup for how he is in general in this movie. I think this movie characterizes Mr. Krabs very, very good. He is a father figure to SpongeBob in this movie, like in the classic era of the show. He tells SpongeBob that it's okay to not be super big and brave, and SpongeBob assumes he's saying this because when he himself, Mr. Krabs, was younger, he also used to be quite a scared chicken. But Mr. Krabs is like, no, I was never a bubble-blowing baby. In fact, I used to sail the seas with the Flying Dutchman, and I was a swashbuckler. And Mr. Krabs is saying all of this to make himself feel good about who he was even back then. But this actually doesn't make SpongeBob feel good. And then when the Flying Dutchman shows up, SpongeBob and Patrick decide to go forwards with him on a mission to have SpongeBob become a swashbuckler, because that's what the Flying Dutchman says that he will do for him, when in actuality the Flying Dutchman is only planning to use him to break his spell. And when the Flying Dutchman takes SpongeBob and Patrick with him to the underworld, we see how visually impressive this movie is. It's not quite as stylized, but honestly, this may be the best looking CG SpongeBob movie. The Sandy Cheeks movie has nothing on this movie. We see a bunch of crazy and spooky looking giant monsters in this new setting SpongeBob and Patrick finds themselves in, as SpongeBob dons a pirate outfit, and Patrick begins slowly driving the Flying Dutchman and his ghost pirate teammates. Absolutely insane. And I find it so funny just how annoying Patrick is to the Flying Dutchman, while being a very good friend to SpongeBob. They're both just goofing around with each other throughout the movie, and kind of getting in the way of the Flying Dutchman's plans of using SpongeBob. They get surrounded by these living skeletons, and SpongeBob gets a hallucination, dream sequence, vision type thing of a big buff Mr. Krabs giving him some advice, saying that what SpongeBob needs to do in this situation is to act like how he thinks Mr. Krabs would. And then we get what is one of the funniest gags in the movie, in my opinion, which is when, after telling SpongeBob everything he needed to know, this hallucination buff Mr. Krabs is just blankly staring at SpongeBob and smiling, and then there's complete silence for like a few seconds, and SpongeBob is saying, so does this end? Oh, we get a montage of the Flying Dutchman and SpongeBob going around beating a bunch of challenges, as SpongeBob is trying to be the big tough guy that he sees Mr. Krabs as, while a very cool modernized remix of a classic SpongeBob track is playing over the montage. I love the music in this movie. Yes, even the Ice Spice song. While all this is going on, meanwhile, Mr. Krabs, along with Squidward and Gary, are going on a big adventure to catch up with SpongeBob and the Flying Dutchman to save SpongeBob from the evil ghost who he has gotten himself involved with. And on their journey into the underworld, we see how out of their league they are. Mr. Krabs, for a guy who apparently used to be a swashbuckler, is going around getting completely terrified by all the big monstrous creatures that him and Squidward are stumbling across. There are a couple awesome scenes in this B-plot of the movie, like one scene where a bunch of sirens playing clarinets draw Squidward in, and then Mr. Krabs does have to try to save him from them. And then my favorite scene is when Mr. Krabs and Squidward have to go into a auto shop that conveniently happens to be along the path that they are going down in this spooky other dimension type place. And inside the shop, there is no one there, which builds a type of unsettling tension as they then see a shoe. No one there, just a shoe that someone had left behind. But then they see the other shoe, and that shoe has the bones of someone's leg stuck inside of it. And it is revealed that this auto shop is a trick and a trap by this giant three-headed bird that wants to eat them. Back to SpongeBob and the Flying Dutchman, he tells SpongeBob that if he wants to continue onwards into becoming a swashbuckler, he doesn't just have to leave a lot of his old childish habits with Patrick behind, he has to leave Patrick behind. We do actually feel bad for Patrick with how sad he gets as he asks SpongeBob, "You don't want to blow bubbles with me anymore?" Mr. Krabs finally catches up to SpongeBob and tries to save him from the Flying Dutchman. But SpongeBob sees this not as him trying to save him, but as him just still viewing him as just a kid, when SpongeBob thought Mr. Krabs would be proud of him as he is on his way to becoming a swashbuckler like he did when he was younger. And that's when Mr. Krabs has to own up to SpongeBob. He never did become a swashbuckler. He too was actually a bubble blowing fly cook. And as the Dutchman has SpongeBob blow on his instrument, blow on this magical pipe that he believes will then magically transform him into a swashbuckler, it then makes the Flying Dutchman get to go back to being the live-action human pirate that he was at the beginning of the movie, meanwhile trapping SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs as ghost pirates. But the fine print in the Dutchman's deal says that if they can break his magical pipe before sundown that same day, then they can reverse the magical spell that made SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs become ghosts. Now it is Mr. Krabs, the father figure who, despite not being perfect, despite accidentally putting SpongeBob down with all of his bragging, so much so that he pushed SpongeBob away and into the grasp of the Flying Dutchman, someone who promised to shape SpongeBob into being the person that he wants to be, but was actually just trying to manipulate and use him. Now it is finally Mr. Krabs and SpongeBob together setting off to take down the Flying Dutchman. We get a super good action scene where SpongeBob finally rides a roller coaster after the Flying Dutchman, who is in that same coaster. Him and Mr. Krabs catch up to him. SpongeBob uses the power of bubble blowing to break the pipe, and yeah, everything goes back to how it was, and that was a amazing movie. And honestly, even though I still think Sponge Out of Water is a more impressive accomplishment because of how well it did at making a very satisfying movie directly after what is the best SpongeBob movie, I think this is the best SpongeBob sequel. Not only is it very fun and entertaining to watch, but it has a very good message message, multiple good messages, and themes about friendship, how getting lost in trying to become someone you're not can sometimes lead to you pushing away some of your closest friends who always lift you up, like Patrick Stout, who SpongeBob pushes away but then eventually apologizes to after realizing he was being used by the Flying Dutchman. You got the stuff between Mr. Krabs and SpongeBob, and all in all, this is just an amazing SpongeBob movie. I began this project of making very passionate YouTube video essays about every single SpongeBob movie because of this newest one that came out in theaters, like I said, in late 2025. But also, I just wanted to make some type of project that would be a bit of a massive undertaking, which I could put a lot of energy and effort into, as a way of showing my love and passion for this bright, positive, fun, entertaining, and funny show that I have loved ever since I was a kid. A show that was one of the many things that got me through all of the overly negative and soul-crushingly crappy stuff that happened in 2020, back when I was still in high school. And yeah, I am so tired. This was a very tiring project, especially after having to watch 2 movies back to back that I didn't love whatsoever, and then having to spend hours and hours and multiple weeks making and editing video essays about. But I'm happy that I did it, because not only do I now feel very accomplished, but I also still had a ton of fun making these videos. If I had to list each of these movies out in order of most favorite to least favorite, I would probably say number 1, the SpongeBob SquarePants movie, number 2, the SpongeBob movie Search for SquarePants, number 3, Plankton the movie, number 4, the SpongeBob movie Sponge Out of Water, number 5, the SpongeBob movie Sponge on the Run, and number 6, Saving Bikini Bottom, the Sandy Cheeks movie. But something interesting that I found when making these video essays is even when I covered the 2 movies that most people, including myself, do not like, I still got a couple of comments of people saying, well, actually, I like this movie, which kinda shows that every one of these movies have at least something in them for someone. And even though some of them are not as beloved as the other ones, the fact that there even are multiple SpongeBob movies that are considered amazing by so many people, multiple movies based on this very strange little show from 1999 that at one point in time wasn't guaranteed a legacy and a lifespan that would go on to last multiple decades, just goes to show how awesome of a show and franchise it is, and also how creative and talented everyone behind it is.